in Mexico, you can still feel that vibe of dogs are dogs and they will do dog things. And if this dog is barking at this guy, people would look, but like some people wouldn't even look. Like life just kept going. You do have those two kind of street dogs, like the street dogs who are maybe they were born in the streets and they're thriving in there. And then you do have this set of dogs who are clearly dogs who learn to live inside a home. And then for some reason, they ended up in the streets and they do struggle a lot. I think like I saw a few prong collars, maybe like 3 dogs with a prong collar, a lot of choke chains, a lot of harnesses that clip in the back. I did not see any harness that clips at the front. And I did not see any.
We really like to live in this gray area where we're not really just black and white. And I know it is easier to just pick a side and have your beliefs all neat and tidy, like in a bow and everything. But man, life is so complex.
So if you live in the gray, just like us,
come join us.
This is the place.
I'm Olivia.
I'm Laura, and this is Ruffly Speaking, a podcast driven by honest, curious conversations about life with dogs.
Each episode, we explore one story or idea that helps us see our relationships with dogs a little differently.
It's not about perfect training or quick fixes. It's about the real, sometimes messy, always evolving nature of sharing life with dogs. Hey guys, so welcome to this episode. This is going to be a tiny bit different of the episodes that we've had so far because we decided that we actually miss having some one-on-one episodes where it's just me and Olivia chatting about dogs and life and all the things that we like talking about. So we decided that now we're going to be doing some episodes where it's just us chatting about certain topics, and then we're also going to have the episodes with our guests. So this is going to be our first solo one, and we were very excited. I was particularly very excited for this one because it's all about my observations about life with dogs in Mexico. So as you know, I am Mexican and I grew up there, but I never, I don't know. I had my own dog and that's all I knew about dogs back then. So it was until I came to Canada that I started studying, to become a dog trainer, body language, behavior, and all the things about dogs. So funny enough, one time Olivia asked my observations about the differences in Mexico versus here. And it was weird for me because I felt like I was very ignorant about like my life in Mexico. I never put attention into those things. And it wasn't a topic that I was invested in back then. So I felt like my observations were a little bit weak in that sense. But I was very excited because I just came back from a trip, actually 2 trips to Mexico. And my whole focus, other than eating and having fun with my family, it was also observing what life with dogs is all about. So basically, this episode is going to be all about that, kind of like the chat that Olivia and I would have had if we went to have coffee and I told her all about the things that I noticed. So we're just going to invite you into it.
Yeah, I'm so excited. I'm like, this is the whole reason we started this podcast was so that we could record our conversations about dogs. And then we were like so excited just to bring more guests on. And then we were like, wait a minute. What about our conversations? Let's go back to that. So I'm so glad we're doing this kind of like intermixing of our conversations with also bringing guests on. So at least we can still have our one-on-one time and chat all things dogs. But I'm very excited to hear about all your observations and all the things you noticed about doggies in Mexico, because this is a hugely fascinating topic for me, like street dogs, village dogs, and just the different behaviors and like sociability you see with dogs who are not insanely attached to humans.
Yeah, and I think my focus the first time I went, it was a lot on street dogs, specifically because like luckily you don't see that many in here. So I kind of like wanted to go back, and specifically in that time, I noticed that when I was like when I was in Mexico, like living there, my whole observation of dogs in the streets, it was very tinted by my personal emotions of feeling sad for them. And, every time I would see one, it was just like, oh, poor little guy. And I was the kind of people who just wanted to save all the doggies. And it's not like I'm not that person anymore, but I feel like this time I was very interested on seeing like their behavior and actually have like a cleaner reading beyond my own personal emotions about what I was feeling seeing a dog in the streets. And now that I can actually read the body language and have a more educated observation from there, I was excited for that. But then my second time, I focus a lot more in like the people that I got to meet and the stories, so like the pet dogs in Mexico, because I had my own, I don't know. I think like sometimes we're so hard with ourselves, and I feel very bad for the life that I gave my dog in Mexico. It was fine. She was okay, but I just wasn't as engaged with her as I am with my doggies now. So I felt very bad. But then now I came back and I remember a lot of good things that we did, and like the trips that we took her in and the adventures that we went. So it was like, okay, I feel like I was just remembering the bad things. And that was a reminder actually. And for people listening, it's a reminder that sometimes our brain really stores the bad things in, and it's kind of like just makes those sound and look even bigger. But once you go back and you see pictures and you see the place and you have all the memories coming back, it's like, oh, we actually had really nice times and we had a lot of fun together. And maybe it's not the same standard that I have now
Uh-huh.
for what I do with my dogs, but it was decent enough. But anyways, like the second time it was way more about life with dogs in Mexico and how people see it, how people respond to behavior problems. That was another thing. So basically, this whole conversation is going to be a mix of that, a mix of the street dogs and my experience with them and what I observe from them, and also what I talk to people about, the struggles that they have with their pets. And I think like also the Marina episode got me thinking a lot about that when she mentioned about, okay, I didn't see that many dog reactivity. Well, I did see dog reactivity in Mexico. So yeah, like that's basically all we're going to talk about. So Olivia has a line of thought that we can follow, and I will be following that.
I think also to preface this episode, this isn't like a heavily researched, like documentarian styled like episode. This is really just Laura's observations, her experiences in Mexico when she went back to go visit. So we might have also a lot of follow-up questions that we might have to figure out ourselves, or it'd be really cool if you guys could, have some input if maybe you are from Mexico, or maybe if you've traveled to other places and had like similar experiences with your observations as well. So, yeah, this is mainly just a preface that these are observations.
Yes. And I think like this is a perfect segue just to mention that actually the reason why we name our podcast Roughly Speaking is because we really believe that everyone has a little piece of the general truth. So it's like it's very hard to know the whole truth, but everyone has little glimpses of that. And like the name Roughly Speaking is because we really want to have those conversations when you don't have to have it all figured out, but we just want to listen to like that topic, story, and experience that you had, and that just gives us one little window to that bigger truth. So yeah, I think like this episode is going to be the perfect example of that, because this is just the little window that I can share with you of what I saw there as a trainer, as someone who works with dogs, and someone who live in that culture as well, because I am, a lot of my values come also from what I learned growing up in Mexico. So it's just kind of like that little preface of that's what this is going to be all about. And really, that's what this whole podcast is all about. None of our guests are like, whoa, this person has the whole truth about everything. And I feel like that's part of the fun, that we can see like all the shades of gray of people just being humans. And yeah, so this is the example of that, hopefully.
Okay, shall we get into it?
Yay, I'm ready.
As she's shaking her protein drink.
If you're not watching on YouTube, I am shaking my lunch.
Okay, so I feel like there's a couple. I mean, there's more than a couple different things that we want to talk about in this episode because we have Laura kind of wrote out her thoughts and kind of put it on a document for me to review. And I'm like, I want to talk about all of it. She's like, feel free to cut out whatever you want. And I'm like, no, I want to talk about all of it. So this might be a long episode just because we're going to be bouncing a lot into like different topics and things. But I think maybe a place to start would just be your overall observation of maybe let's start with street dogs because we can talk about pet dogs in where you saw them, but let's talk about the street dogs and what was your general observation? Because I feel like for people who may have not had that experience or had a lot of, because, well, okay, let me back it up first.
See, we have so many ideas, guys.
There's a lot running through my mind right now. Okay, so I think living in Canada, and especially where we're from, like Metro Vancouver, we don't really have street dogs. That's not really a thing here. We maybe have like lost dogs, strays, maybe even more like rural areas, but you don't see dogs ever just running around like urban environments, cities. Like that's not really a thing unless they're like lost. Whereas even comparing it to maybe the United States, you like if you go to LA or if you go to
Texas.
I don't know, just yeah, Texas, like any city, there's a lot of like a lot more street dogs. So even the environment from there to here is a lot different. And then going further south into Mexico, also very different. So when you are observing street dogs, what is the general like what is it you notice? Because I feel like a lot of people who don't have that experience would be like, oh, they're starving. It's so sad. They don't have a home to go to. But what did you notice?
Well, I actually noticed the exact same thing, not the starving, but the actual opposite. Because again, it's funny, kind of like this whole process, because I am talking from, like, it's my country. I grew up there. I grew up living with street dogs. As I showed you, like, we walk our dog, and this time I saw another girl walking her dog with the stick. So it's just like the stick in your hand when you're walking your dog is a thing because like any dog can come in for you. Doesn't happen very often. It never happened to me actually. But you can see that that is kind of like how everyone just lives, assuming that you're gonna find dogs outside who are not just off leash dogs. They're from the streets, and they're also kind of like gang members. So that's a whole thing. But the first thing, yeah, they have like their little gang, so it's very funny. But this time, so again, like I was going there with that idea of like how I felt about dogs, and it's again funny how the brain really like shapes things, and it's just like, oh, all the dogs are starving and are like dying in the streets. And what I notice is that the dogs are pretty well fed. Like I didn't see maybe I saw a couple who were on the lean side, but most of them were like pretty well nourished. I mean, I'm sure that they are just eating shit out of the streets and whatever they can find, but they were not starving. Like they were sometimes even chunky. So I was like, okay, so they clearly have a successful strategy to get their food because and all of these dogs I have to say is from Guanajuato, which is like a very touristic place. So it's not like a beach or anything, but it's like quite touristic. So I feel like dogs really learn to captivate the tourist, and you can see like hopefully I can put in some videos on YouTube, but I saw this dog who was just kind of like mingling outside restaurants, and then he would just follow people who had food in their hands and see if if he can get anything. The people ignore him, he will go back and then just chill in the sunshine and then wait for someone else to be and see if he could follow. And again, he didn't seem like starving, like fully starving. I mean, I'm sure he was a good scavenger, but he seemed well fed. So that's the general thing that I notice in most of the dogs. Yes, they have a lot of fleas and you can see all like the little insects, and they were all kind of like scratching themselves. But like kind of like in terms of food, they clearly have a successful strategy to get their food because they are not like in their bone, so to speak, at least the dogs that I got to see. And again, all of this is in León and Guanajuato, and that's kind of like the area. And just like Olivia said, I would love to hear more thoughts and more experiences of people outside even Mexico. Like there's street dogs in so many places. But yeah, so that's the first thing that caught my eye, that the dogs seem, number one, seem very savvy in the street, so
Mhm.
they
Mhm.
know how to navigate. They walk with a purpose, so
Mhm.
like they you can see that they're not lost, they're not, because that's how I remember them, like kind of like being like, oh, this is dangerous. And again, this comes from an old belief of mine that honestly I thought that dogs didn't understand anything, that didn't understand about life, didn't understand about safety. They were just like little babies outside in the world. So of course, every time I would see a dog in the streets, I would feel like, oh my God, there's this abandoned baby out there. But this time I got to see that they're pretty smart and they have their strategies. And the other thing that caught my attention is that kind of like street dogs feel this symbiotic relationship with humans,
Mhm.
because a big thing in Mexico is safety. So everyone's worried about safety because that's a big thing. So I feel like humans kind of like get like kind of like, yeah, like they kind of like collaborate with these street dogs where they don't force them to stay with them. So I would see this a lot in parking lots, and that they have, like all these cars coming and going, and they all had like their house street dog. The dog would be out in the streets and moving around, but whenever he wanted, he would come back and even go inside this. There was kind of like a little, no, I don't want to say tent, but like a little place where the cashier is kind of like charging
Mhm.
the like everyone coming into the parking lot, and the dog would just go inside and sit with her, and it was be accepted. But at the same time, you could see that the dog had no color, like it wasn't someone's dog; it was just a dog that
Mhm.
they accept, and they would have often like little bowls of water and food, and they just leave it there for them. But it's not like it's their dog, but it's kind of like
Mhm.
they give the dog some shelter, and in return the dog is just kind of like patrolling the area, which I found that it was very interesting because it doesn't seem like no one did any training, or there was like no real arrangement of like, oh yeah, we tie it to this leash and then it stays with him. It's just like the dog is free to come and go, but the dog just chooses to be there because he knows that some safety and some food, who's gonna come in. So I just, all of that made me think about how really sometimes we put a lot of, I don't know, we put a lot of emotion into our relationship with dogs. And a client once told me, like, yes, like my dog, like he's there for his own benefit, right? Like he's not there just to love me and be like I am not his whole life. And I think like that's a reality for many dogs. Like they are self-serving creatures just like us. And if there's an earthquake, I'm sure they're gonna think about keeping themselves safe before maybe like rescuing others. And I'm sure there's a lot of like hero dogs out there, but I feel like the reality is that the relationship has to be a win-win when it comes to dogs. And if the dog feels like, oh yeah, like there's a lot of benefits from staying here and
Mhm.
being with this human,
Mhm.
then I am gonna provide this and that. But it's really nothing that people are looking for. It's just like things happen and the arrangement, it's in place and the dogs accept that and it works. So it just reminded me
Mhm.
of the fact that it's a collaboration at the end of the day. And yeah,
Yeah.
that was interesting.
I feel like the classic example for like pet dogs here when you think of that relationship is, oh, she's just protecting me or he's protecting me and like he's just very protective. For the most part, I would say dogs aren't like that. They don't necessarily protect people.
Mhm,
If
mhm.
anything, they might value you highly and see a benefit in having you around or see a benefit in having that relationship, but it's not really protection in the way that we view protection, especially when it comes
Mhm,
to like
mhm.
reactive dogs. Because you hear it a lot with reactive dogs. Oh, they're protecting you, or they just want to, like, ensure that your bubble is safe or whatever. But it's not really like that. There's the reason why the dog is doing what they're doing, and it's likely not because they're protecting you. Sorry to burst your bubble. I know you think your dog, like your dog probably does love you, but I don't think they see it in that way of wanting to protect you. They're probably protecting themselves and
Mhm,
protecting their
mhm.
resources and the things that they find valuable. Um, protection dogs, different story. They're trained for that. That's a different thing. But I think that's what it's speaking to, that relationship of like that symbiosis where they see something of value in being in that parking lot, being in that space, and in return, what they do is kind of patrol the area. Did you see any like instances of them actually patrolling or even kind of being like a warning sign for people who maybe weren't necessarily supposed to be in that area or
Funny enough, like most of them, I think like everything was pretty chill when it was there. I think like the only instance of no, I don't want to say like patrolling, but it's the video that I sent you. So if like hopefully I can edit this and add it for the YouTube people. But I took this video of a dog, which I just found like fascinating because it was a dog. There's like a lot of not non-regulated like merchants in the streets. So there is this guy with just like a little table and he's selling like handmade stuff. So it and he's in like a very popular spot. So there's a lot of people around. And he's just kind of like on his phone, and I didn't realize that there was a dog inside of the table because it was covered. And then all of a sudden, this dog comes out and he does like a little stretch. I think I didn't record that part because I started recording when the dog saw a guy walk by. And from all the people that were around, that guy had something that this dog did not like. And the dog just started like chasing him and barking at him. He wasn't like, he never kind of like made contact with the person or anything, but he was pretty much like, fuck off. And he was just like barking, barking, barking. And then when the guy just kept going, and also like, that's another thing that surprised me that like, I don't know if it's just us Mexicans, people don't make a fuss. It's just like, it's a dog being a dog. And that's one thing that I noticed that in there, I think like the mentality is like, we still remember that dogs are dogs. And I feel like sometimes, at least I feel in here, because of how deep into our lives are dogs. And, you know, like people want to go into the cafe with their dog and they want to do into all these things that are really not like natural for the world of dogs. It's just like a lot of dogs thrive in those environments, but it's not a dog thing to go to cafes and mingle with all these people. So I feel like in Mexico, you can still feel that vibe of dogs are dogs and they will do dog things. And if this dog is barking at this guy, like people would look, but like some people wouldn't even look. Like life just kept going, and the guy was just kind of like, oh yeah, and I think he just kind of like pretended to kick the dog, and then the dog was like, okay, well, and he just came back in front of his little place, and then he kept looking around, and I think he had just like, okay, I have to keep doing this, because anytime it was one guy kind of like skinny, walking a little bit faster than the rest, that's the guy that he would go for. So there were like three guys that walked by, and it was just kind of like, and then one guy kind of like stopped to talk to someone, and then the dog was just kind of like, oh well, like nothing to do here then. And then he started like barking to another guy, and then the guy went away, and then the dog was just like, oh, okay, I'll go back to sleep. And he just went inside and just kind of like took a nap with the guy. But the guy, the owner, I want to say, which I don't know if it is actually the owner, or if he just also benefits from having a safe place for the dog, and the dog may take care of him. But yeah, like no one did anything. The guy didn't call him back. No one was like, who's this dog, or freaking out about it. It was just like, oh well, it's a dog being a dog, and that's it. So I feel like I just found that refreshing because of all the issues that you may find in here, that, you know, there's an off-leash dog and people like freak out, and then there's this thing happening, or a dog barks. I had like a client mention that a dog barked at her neighbor, and the neighbor started to say like, oh no, I'm gonna, you know, complain with Strata. And it's just like, it's a dog being a dog, you know, like dogs bark. So yeah, I think like that was just like coming back to say that, yeah, like in Mexico, a lot of people just view dogs, and it's just like accept the chaos that comes with a dog. But that was the only instance where I saw a dog actually kind of like going for someone. Other than that, they were just chilling and taking the sun.
I mean, it's also this difference in like cultural and like how we see dogs as like a part of our, like here it's very much like they're a part of our family and they're like our little babies. And I'm like, yeah, that I'm sure that happens in Mexico too, just it's not as common. Because I think you mentioned that most people are just trying to worry about themselves and trying to get by, and you know, they have other things to worry about rather than worrying about a dog. And I'm sure for like a lot of those street vendors, um, it probably benefits them more just to have a dog nearby, like a street dog that's just kind of also benefiting from this relationship rather than actually taking the dog into their home and caring for the dog and now worrying about the dog. And it just becomes like another expense, just to be
Hmm.
pretty blunt about it. Like dogs are expensive, and like if you want to care for a dog, it's not cheap, and a lot of people just need to worry about you know um what their needs are and how their needs are being met. So it makes sense that a lot of dogs would just be around and kind of thriving on this environment where they see the same people every day, because I'm sure the routine is very consistent too, right?
Hmm.
Kind of what you said about like the dogs knowing how to really play on like the tourists. And you wouldn't think that tourists would act the same, but I know Ricky always says this all the time. Like when you go to the same places, it's actually very routine. The things that you see, even though it's like different sets of people coming by and even people from different cultures, but the way they kind of treat the environment is very similar. So these dogs are kind of just learning, okay, well, every third person will give me food or something, right? Like it's going to happen eventually. And if I just keep hanging around here and not like be a fuss, then I will get fed eventually. But they have learned that like this behavior for them has become reinforcing. Like if I just hang around, this random tourist will give me, I don't know, a snack maybe, or maybe some water, and I'll just keep doing that because that works for them.
Yeah, and I think like it goes back. I remember I was so mind blown when I think it was actually my brother-in-law. Like I was just getting started into like working with dogs, and then he had to do a presentation where he had to, I think like just choose a random topic, and I think he chose like the evolution of dogs. I don't remember exactly what his
Mm.
topic was, but then he was the one who came in, and he was just like, "Whoa, did you know that dogs kind of like develop the muscles around the
Uh-huh.
eyebrows because that was a successful strategy to communicate with humans. And the more domesticated the wolves would get, like the more movement on the eyebrows. So like knowing that even like the anatomy has been evolving in the sense of like this alliance that dogs have with humans and giving them more tools to communicate with them, because of course like the sad little eyes, they are like kind of like the thing that they always do, and it's successful, just like you said. At some point someone will do it, and yeah, I think like that is just like fascinating how the dogs really have a way. And it's funny because I saw in my second trip, I saw a dog who was kind of like very like, oh my god, like these guys in my second trip, we almost ran over like four dogs because they were just not paying
Gosh.
attention. They would just cross the street, and then there was this dog who was, oh my god, so cute. It was like a little terrier mix. And I saw him kind of like just mingling very close to the road, and we're talking about this type of like 6-lane kind of road, and the doggy was kind of like way too close to us, and then he just decided to cross, and I was just like, this is it. Like, I mean, we stopped, but they were like four more lanes on this side, and then there were like more lanes coming along. I was like, this is happening, I'm gonna see a dog die here. But luckily, I mean, at least we just kept going, and I'm just like, hope for the best, and I think everyone stopped. But yeah, like this dog, it's one that I did notice that he was just like not in his element. So I feel like there you do have those two kind of street dogs, like the street dogs who are, maybe they were born in the streets and they're thriving in there, and then you do have this set of dogs that either someone threw them out of their house or they are lost. And there's like these other components of pet dogs who lose their home and then they are trying to survive. And I feel like that is the image of street dog that I had, which is the one that is looking lost, doesn't know what to do, decides to cross the road where it's like
Mhm.
the most stupid idea. So I feel like that's the two, yeah, the two difference that I would mention when it comes to the street dogs. There's the dogs who are clearly dogs who like learn to live inside a home, and then for some reason they ended up in the streets and they do struggle a lot. And then you have the dogs who are in their elements, and you can see them like,
Mhm.
that's where it comes with like these gangs. Because we saw that this, it was like four dogs, and I think like one of them was limping, and I felt so bad. I was like, I don't think you're gonna be here next week. But he was just kind of like there. Like, being honest, life is rough. But they are like there, and then kind of like they find something and then they call the others, and then they kind of like share the resources. And so they do have their groups, and they find their ways, and they have their
Mm-hmm.
strategies as a group to thrive. But like they're also like, again, yeah, these dogs who are just lost, and that's very sad. So sad.
Mm-hmm. Did you notice that was like most dogs that kind of had a pack per se that they were kind of traveling with, or were you just noticing maybe like one or two that were a little bit more
Hmm.
distinct?
No, it's actually more solo dogs. I notice more like the ones who are alone, and they're like mingling and doing their things and walking around. And I just saw two packs, two packs of dogs who were like clearly together. We saw another
Mm-hmm,
one that it was
mm-hmm,
three dogs also crossing the street who were like driving me crazy. But at least they knew, like you can see that they knew what they were doing. They were kind of like waiting, and it was cute because like two of them cross the street, and then they look around, and then they wait for the other guy to also cross. So it's just like, oh, look at them. But the rest, most of the dogs are just alone, and they are just
mm-hmm.
kind of like living life on their own means.
Mhm. I find that so interesting because I've been reading that book, Canine Enrichment for the Real World,
Hmm.
and in it they talk about like different research about the evolution of dogs and how dogs came to be and dispelling different types of myths like pack mentality. And I think that's interesting to notice in the street dogs as well, that there are plenty of solo dogs who have learned to develop these relationships with people and humans and live very happily and very like in a very stable way. And then there are others who just have formed social groups within themselves to be able to help each other. So, like, I mean, the whole pack mentality thing is a whole it's a myth, but it's interesting how even that speaks to that evolution that like dogs, they essentially became domesticated because they became so reliant on us and because we were able to have this relationship where we could help each other, and they grew to the dogs that there are now because of the way that we lived. But it's interesting to see that you only noticed like maybe a couple packs kind of roaming around and having that relationship where they relied on each other and kind of called to each other to be able to share a resource or even, I don't know.
Hmm.
Did you notice anything else in the way that they were like moving about? Or I'm
No, you
asking
can
you
see
like
that
you
they
were
were.
like filming a documentary or something.
Yeah, like while I was walking to Walmart, I
Yeah.
got to see the dog. But yeah, no, I think like both of them, you can tell that they were just kind of like scavenging, and they
Mm.
were just kind of like sniffing the ground and moving together. But yeah, I also noticed how, yeah, like it was just two groups that I got to see. But other than that, most of the dogs that I saw, and like they were just walking around, it was kind of like, yeah, they would acknowledge each other, but they would choose to kind of like just like, oh, we're gonna go separate. And I guess that also speaks to, like when you do have more dogs, you get more resources, but at the same time you have to share those resources.
Mhm.
And I guess that it could be a much like smarter strategy to just, like go once you find a human or a group of humans who will reliably get you food. Or like maybe also I saw a lot of hanging around like dumpsters where, like they were kind of like just opening garbage to find some food inside. So, like when you do find those things and you have that source of either safety or food, I guess that it's easier for you to just be like, okay, I'm just gonna care about me, and I
Mhm.
have this,
Mhm.
like connection with these humans, and that's gonna be it. But yeah, I didn't get to see that many like actually mingling. I get to see more maybe in households, because that's another thing, like you have like a whole spectrum of people living with dogs. So you have the dogs from the streets who are just in the streets, and they're like living out of like garbage, or they go to taco stands, and they know where to find their food. Then you have, based on my observations, a category of dogs like this coexisting with humans, where they have this very free relationship of they come and go, but they have kind of like their safety place to sleep and to be, and they have food, and they have someone to, eh, doesn't take care of them, but it's just there and provide some form of shelter. And
Mhm.
then, like from there, you have a whole mix. There's a lot of people who have dogs, like just living in their property, but they're also like very free. And then you have people who have like 7 dogs, and it's just like a lot of dogs. And then they're just like walking around, and they're also like they just open the door and then they go out, kind of like what I mentioned that my family used to do with my dog when I was growing up, that she would just like scratch the door and you open the door and she goes out, and in
Mhm.
2 hours she scratched the door and she wants to come back. And then you have people who are actually like pet dogs, basically how we see it in here, that your dog will never leave your home without you, and you're always together. So it's kind of like all those like in between the pet dogs who live in their home and know the life that we see a lot in here. From the street dogs, you have a whole spectrum of how people live. So there is a lot of people who, yeah, they have their dog inside, but they're just in the roof, and the dog
Mhm.
lives and dies
Mhm.
in the roof, and that's it. Which in my case, I would rather people just have them in the streets and let them at least have a chance on their own than having them in the roof. But to each their own. So yeah, there is kind of like all of that. So it's very complicated to really say like, oh, this is how things happen, because it's really
Mhm.
a huge spectrum of how people live with dogs. And I feel like that is at the end of the day my takeaway, that yeah, like people really approach life with dogs in very different ways.
Mhm.
And yeah, like that's part of life. And I think like that's something that I used to mention to you, that when I started like studying to become a dog trainer here, my experience was that I started in a very, 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 very force free school. So it was a lot of, like the high standards that you have, what's ethical and what is abuse. And something that would constantly like make noise in my head was the fact that they would throw the word abuse so easily. And I felt so bad because a lot of the things are things that people do casually in Mexico,
Mhm.
so it was just kind of like it was hard for me to kind of like the things that I grew up seeing, all of the sudden it's just like I have to condemn that and shame that. But at the same time, I could see the complication of like, okay, how am I going to go there as a trainer and tell people about your dog's needs and satisfying them, and, like emotional needs and physical needs and exercise needs and nutrition needs, when the human is not able to satisfy their own needs because they have maybe like 7 children and they're working like 3 jobs and they're doing all these things. So of course, the last thing they're gonna think about is their dog. So for me, what it just seems so out of tune for me, like with my experience, all of the sudden having to shame these and having to hold people to like a standard that at least for me it seems like so unreachable because of like how much you keep asking and asking, and like the dog deserves this and that. And for me was always like, okay, I have to pretend that I'm gonna come in here with this knowledge and share it with someone in Mexico. It's like, okay, like I have to make it make sense, right? If not, I'm just gonna be speaking and the person's gonna be like, this person is crazy. So I feel like for me that was a big thing of meeting people where they're at and helping them make smaller changes, but that can at the end of the day really improve the life of the dog and the human, but not forgetting one or the other, because I feel like that's sometimes something that is very easy to see with people when like they continue to set up these like such huge standards. And I think it's similar to what you talked about with Justine of like seeing the pretty bowls, and then you are like, I am not able to do that. And that kind of like it's a gatekeeper of you not
Mhm.
being able to enjoy that because you feel that that's so far away. I feel like sometimes in training we try to make it look like this super pretty bowl, and people just don't relate to that. So yeah, I think like
Mhm.
that's where a lot of my like push into really like this non-judgmental approach, and not making people feel bad about their experience and their choices, because it's like you don't know until you know, and I want you to
Mhm.
know and not put a barrier in between you and me because I am demanding perfection from you.
Mhm. No, I totally understand. Now that you talk about that, I'm wondering how much of like culture is an impact on how both you and I see that. Because for me, like my parents are Vietnamese Chinese. They were both born in Vietnam. They had to flee Vietnam when they were in their teens. But for them, they also saw dogs in a very similar way as to what you were describing when you used to see dogs as kids. Like in Vietnam, I the last time I was there when I was like 16, and they still had cages upon cages upon cages of dogs for meat trade, you know? Like
Mm-hmm.
that's just the real, like, and that was that was like 15 years ago, and things have changed, but they haven't changed entirely so that dog meat trade is non-existent. Like it still exists.
Mm-hmm.
So there's also that level of like, well, we treat cows like we slaughter cows. Cows are also really intelligent and they're really cute and they act like big dogs. But why do we see it differently? I think it's just like this cultural understanding of like, okay, I just need to see where people are coming from and understand what their relationship has been like with dogs so far, rather than just implementing all of this, like what you should and what you should not do onto just generally everybody, because that also is not very helpful for a lot of people because they are only doing the best that they can with the tools that they have, and if they don't know that already, like it's not their fault, you know.
I know, if
So I
they're
can
like, dogs are tasty, it's like, okay.
exactly. So like if
Let's
that's
just
your
start with one step.
baseline, like can you imagine trying to get them up to the point of like, let's make a little shredding box for a dog? You're like, what the frick are you talking about? I don't understand.
You shred the dog.
Yeah. Oh my god. That is
It's
so
getting dark.
funny. Yeah, it's getting dark. It's getting dark, but it's funny.
I mean, you have to laugh about it because it's really like everything is so unique in everyone's heads. And I think like
Yeah.
once I used to be that person too, where I just wanted to save the world and save all the dogs and save all the things and set up the standards. And, like I feel like there is like good intentions in that. And I appreciate it. And I think the world needs people who kind of like pushes that and kind of like shares that knowledge. But at least for me, I kind of like I am someone who sees the complexity of life and cannot not laugh about all of these things, because just like you said, like just like someone is, like crying because their dog from like 15 years died and it was part of the family. You do have someone else who is just eating a dog right now. So it's just like that's just part of the life that we live in. And we need to accept that. And we're gonna go with the people who aligns with how we see the things and the world. And I think like that's at the end of the day what I when I came to realize that you can only like know what you like and what you want, and then go outside into the world and share that. And people who connect with that, who are in kind of like that same wavelength, are gonna connect with that. And whoever doesn't, it's not for them, it's not content
Mhm.
for them, and it's fine. There's a
Mhm.
whole spectrum of people out there, and you'll find your person somewhere. So I think like once you stop fighting into trying to convince the whole world, and you just focus on trying to connect with the people who are looking for the same things that you are and serve those people, I feel like you're gonna have a happier life if you focus on that.
Totally. I think that's why we get each other. We really understand the reality of like what things are, and we don't try to like sugarcoat it or like try to pretend it's something else, because then you just get stuck in this like woo-woo world where, like you're just trying to make everything better and everything's wonderful and it's all sunshine and rainbows and butterflies, but it's just not that way for everybody, and you just
Yeah.
have to be able to understand where everybody's viewpoints are at and where they're coming in the conversation from. So I think, yeah, that's an interesting. I would like to dive into that more. But going back to going back
This
to your
got darker than
observations,
we
I know.
thought. Going back.
Went on a huge tangent. But okay, so we talked about like the street dogs and stuff, and you touched a little bit about like pet dogs in Mexico. But what, from your perspective, because I know you said it's like really nuanced, and it's nuanced everywhere you go, no matter what region you're in, regarding like how people treat their pets and have pet dogs. But what, from your perspective, like just on the street, was the daily life of an average dog owner? And then also, if you can explain more about the reactivity part that you were talking about.
Yeah, well, that was something that surprised me because number one, I was first, as I mentioned, my first trip, it was all about the street dogs and observing what I could see. And the thing that surprised me is that like the street dogs, and going back to it's the street dogs who you can tell that they're completely adapted to this street dog life. they're very balanced dogs. Like they can see another dog and it's not like they're not gonna rush and like bark at the other dog. They're very balanced dogs. Like I was recording this doggy and you know, like I could see that someone's coming and you can tell that my brain is wired for sensitive dogs because the dog was kind of like looking the other way and I could see this guy coming who was gonna walk like right next to the dog. And I was just like, oh my God, he's gonna spook him or he's gonna freak him out. And I mean, the dog just kind of like did like a little like, oh, and it was just like, oh, there's a human. And then he just continued with his way. And it was just like with humans, with sounds, with everything, they're like so well adapted to that. So I was like, oh my God, are we ruined dogs? Because like these dogs are like so free and they are so balanced. And what is going on? Maybe Mexico has the cure for all behavior problems. But then I started talking with people with dogs. And then that's where they all came in to say that, you know, like we were in a wedding and we talked to like a few friends of Fernando, and then Fernando would come back from talking with someone and he's just like, yeah, she's a trainer and he has a reactive dog. I was just like, oh my God, okay, so there is reactivity and Mexico doesn't have the cure for reactivity and behavior problems. So yeah, like the life of people with dogs, it's very similar to what we see in here. I think like one thing that I noticed is that, yeah, like they struggle. They do have, I mean, at least everyone that I knew, they have issues with their dogs. Like, oh yeah, we walk and he wants to eat everyone. And you know, like he used to be okay, but like at 3 years old, like and now she just wants to like lunch and attack every dog that she sees. So now we have to keep her on leash. And then, yeah, like people who are like, oh yeah, they rescued this dog, but she's fine. But like the one that we got since the puppy is like super aggressive with other dogs. So like dog reactivity, I mean, I'm gonna say slash aggression because I didn't see the dog, so I'm not sure which one really was. But that is a thing. But again, like people, what I noticed that people really approach that like very casually of just like, oh yeah, and they do that, and you know, like yeah, and like no one can walk her dog, and they're like a little terror. But at the same time, you know, like I did share like a few things like with them, and they were like so mind blown to the fact of like, yeah, what are we not using their instincts? She loves food. So like every time that we're out, we never thought about bringing food with us. And I think like if I do those games, she's gonna really love it. So I think like once I started like sharing things with them, they were very receptive, at least for like the approach that I take and like the little advice that I could give them. They were very surprised by just kind of like, oh wow, you can use play and you can use these type of things, and yeah, I'm gonna give that a try. But at the end of the day, they were that day like, oh yeah, I'm desperate. Like we've tried like 4 trainers and no one, you know, like nothing helps. But at the same time, they like once I came back and I told them like, oh yeah, if you want to reach out or anything, they were like, oh yeah, well like we'll reach out at some point. So it's not like something that they really see like super urgent of fixing in their lives. They have a lot of priorities, which by the way, I would be very interested to talk about a trainer in Mexico because I feel like they would have. I actually met, I mean, I saw an ad from one and then I started following him on Instagram, and then we started chatting, and then he invited me to see the facility and everything, but I didn't went to Guanajuato. But I would love to hear at least like what problems do they focus on. I did notice that a lot of trainers in Mexico, they're still very much in this mindset of military advice and like, you know, like everything. I remember when I took my dog in maybe 2005 or 2008 to like a trainer, it was all like all the decoration and everything is like military, like police dog, and they all have like choke chains. That's what I was telling you, like choke chains are the go-to like in Mexico. Like even if you're not training a dog, it's kind of like the sleep lead is kind of like the easy thing to put on your dog. Again, kind of things that, you know, like I knew that all my dogs, I mean, my dog, I don't think my dog didn't walk on a leash. We were naughty that way. But she had a very amazing break also. But anyways, like, yeah, like most of the dogs have, and all the dogs that I had, they have their choke chains, and that's how you just walk them. And then, of course, they're like, but it's just like, oh, they're gonna. I remember Fernando's had 2 dogs. One is a boxer, and the other one was pit bull mix, the pit bull mix would be obsessed with her boxer. And then if she walked like in front of us, she would be like just choking herself, and like the front legs, it was just like flying because she just wanted to be there, and she was like choking. And it's just like, but no one applied any training or anything. It was just like, oh, it's the choke chain, and you put it on, and yeah, they're choking, but like doesn't stop the
Oh
dog
yeah,
from
they're
continually choking. Yeah, it's just like, oh yeah, and then they just cough a little and they continue to do it. So it's just it's funny. Again, it's like a little, yeah, like sometimes Mexico feels like a I don't know, like an AI made place because of all the random things that you see. But then I also got to see that a lot of people walking dogs in harnesses. And this is a funny one that I wanted to tell you, because one day we went to like kind of like this city center, and we were there, like we were ordering some food. And then I saw that this guy came in because Fernando was asking me like, oh, like now people call like reactive dogs to like any dog who just does dog things. Like if they
Mhm.
bark, it's reactive. And I was like, no, like, so like the reactivity really. So I was trying to explain to him that it's just when the dog acts way over the top for
Mhm.
the situation applies. So like, yeah, a dog barking, it's normal. But if you have a dog barking and trying to lunge and doing this thing because a person walked by, that's where you kind of like move into the category of the reactivity. So I was trying to explain to him. And that day, like there were a lot of dogs going there. And yeah, like they would just bark to the owner or like bark to another dog and kind of like just like, "Ruff," and that's it. But then you had one that I was like, see, that's the reactive one. Because he was walking like any dog that would come by, like close, far, he would just like, ah! And he had a harness. And it was just funny to me because, again, I really wanted to come in from like this, like, not judging people, because of course
Mhm.
this is something I wouldn't do. But like the guy at some point, because he was just like, yeah, no, like take it easy, and he was just kind of like pulling him back and things like that. But at some point he was ordering food and the dog was freaking out to another dog, and it was a tiny dog. So he just like lifted him and the dog was hanging from the harness, and he was just like, ah. And I was just like, oh my God.
It's another definition of air jail.
Literally, I was just like, wow. Because the guy was just kind of like talking with the lady, and he was just holding his dog up. And like, no, of course, the dog was freaking out. And I could see that the dog was like super insecure and he was having all these reactions. But number one, the human didn't care for the experience of the dog. He just wanted to order his food and maybe just walk around. And then, yeah, like he was just like, this is how I fix it. So I just found it like, oh, look at that. That's how it's fixed. So yeah, I really wanted to have that very clean of like just observing, don't judge the human, don't say all the things that they're doing wrong, just observe what they're doing. And that's it. So that was my approach. So that's why I am good at laughing about these things, because again, like you cannot fix the whole world. That's something that I do believe. So sometimes you have to take a step back and just say like, okay, like right now I am just an observant, because this is what I was telling Fernando, like I'm going to go home, and as much as I can preach here, like, oh, do this, do that, just like I'm going to go home and life is going to continue to be the same in here, So it's just like right now I just want to be a quiet observant. And, like sometimes you have to laugh about this type of things, but that was a strategy. So again, coming back, a lot of choke chains, a lot of, like, yeah, harnesses. A
Mhm.
lot of harnesses that clip in the back. I did not see any harness that clips at the front, which to me, I just found that interesting because of how much I play around
Mhm.
with the front and the back, and just seeing that all the dogs in there, like even a husky who was just kind of like pulling like crazy. I was just like, well, no wonder, because it has like little harness attached in the back. So yeah, I just found that interesting. But also I did not see, I think like I saw a few prong collars, maybe like 3 dogs with a prong collar, and I did not see any e-collars. So clearly e-collars are not a huge thing. And I think like
Mhm.
that goes back to the fact, because that same day that I was doing those observations, I got to see, because I found what intrigued me the most from every person with a dog that I saw is this type of people. I saw 2 particular examples. One was an artisan who was just kind of like, he was just kind of like there. Like, I mean, before I knew that he was doing art, I was like, maybe he's a little bit sketchy. But he would just come in and sit down and do like little earrings. And yeah, he was just doing his jewelry. And he
Mhm.
had this husky, who, poor husky, he was just kind of like dying in the heat in Guanajuato. But what I saw is that this guy didn't have a leash on him, didn't have a collar on him, but the dog would always be next to him. If not next to him, the dog would be very close to him and always looking around for him. So like the dog was like mingling, like trying to get some fresh air, and then he would like constantly be looking back to see what the human was doing, the interaction that he was having. So he was very attentive to this human, and the guy, like, he was just there. He was doing his thing, and he said, "Oh yeah, my dog, he does that," and he would just invite kids to say hello to the dog, which I wish I would have recorded that whole interaction, because a kid came in and the dog was just like, not like, he was very polite, but he was just kind of like turning away. And I told Fernando, like, what do you read from that interaction? And he was just like, "Oh, it's okay." And I was just like, "No, look at the dog." The dog doesn't want that, but it's very polite about it, because he's just kind of like turning away, standing up, going the other way. But it was just funny to see how like his reading is really off.
Yeah.
But yeah, I could see that, and I felt like that is, at least for me as a trainer, that is. I feel like that's true power, when you really
Mhm.
have that connection with your dog, that you don't have to be 24/7 with them or like be managing the whole time, but the dog is just so attentive, and like he wants, like he knows you are, like you are that source of whatever safety, and then they're just there. And then I saw another guy who is, I think, like this one of the guys who are just picking up like recyclables from like garbage cans and things like
Mhm.
that. And he was walking, and he had two dogs, and same, like the dogs off leash, but the dogs were just like minding their own thing, walking around. They would sometimes sniff. The guy didn't even turn back. Like he was just walking on his own way. And the dogs were like doing their thing, and they would look, and then they would run to them. And he was fully trusting that the dogs were going to follow him. But they didn't have any collars, any leashes. There was no tool being used other than, I'm guessing, the relationship that they're building. So that to me is what really like struck me the most, because for some reason I've been seeing a lot of, all of the sudden everyone's recommending like the best tool is an e-collar and it's this and that. And at least for me, it's like I've never used one, and I kind of like want to learn how to use it, because I feel like as a trainers you should like at least know the tool. But like for me, just sounds like we've been living together with dogs for like centuries and centuries, and we've never had an e-collar. So it's just like there's a way to communicate with the dogs efficiently without the need of an e-collar. That's just kind of like the modern thing. So for
Mhm.
me, I feel like that's where my rejection to it comes. Of course, there's the whole thing about like the using pain and la la la. But for me, it comes from like we've done this, like us humans, we've been able to build this relationship with dogs from the beginning, from the moment there was a wolf and that wolf decided to mingle with humans. So yeah, like I think like this trip just reminded me that that's the proof that you can have a very reliable relationship, a very well trained dog, because even though the guy didn't care, and I'm sure he never did formal training with their dogs, the dog was super balanced, was super chill, was there. He would choose to be next to him. So it's like that's the type of training that I want to do. So yeah, just found that interesting.
No, I 100% agree. I'm like, that is the dream where your, like, dog follows you around just like a little Pokemon and, like, you don't have to like there is no sense of control, right? Like,
Hmm.
you don't need you don't have to feel like you're controlling something in order to have a relationship with it, but, like, the dog could have its own life essentially and be emotionally regulated and be confident in its choices and still make its own choice to want to follow you. Like, that is the
Hmm.
ultimate goal, and I think that's what a lot of us really strive for. It actually reminds me of this girl I follow on Instagram. Her name is Bianca. I think her handle is Punk Mutts, but she's from Italy, I believe, and she currently lives in Thailand, I think it is. But she focuses a lot on street dogs and like village dogs and really reading like body language and understanding social dynamics and how you can actually help train your dog by becoming really in tune with those types of skills to be able to develop a relationship like that where you don't have to rely
Hmm.
on things like an e-collar, a prong collar, or even a leash depending on the dog. But she has some really interesting, like I've only taken one webinar by her, but she has some really interesting content about how that relationship can develop and how very like subtle cues in communication can speak really like volumes, and you don't need like overcorrections even between dogs. Like you don't need that stuff. It's really just subtle. So I think, yeah, that would be like the ultimate dream in being able to have a dog that just is able to make its own choices and have agency while still being very in tune with you as its owner and as its like, you know, as its bubble of like safety and stuff. So I think that's super
And
interesting.
honestly, I think like the funny part is that thinking back to at least my experience with my own dog in Mexico, again, like we took her, I remember she would always pull on the leash. She was a cocker spaniel, so she was very into just exploring and going for her nose, and she didn't care about anything else. So we took her to this academy, which was like, it was just like so silly. And of course, it was just like the choke collar. Every time she walks, you kind of like pull her, and it's just pulling her up and like doing these things. And then we tried it. And I remember my mom was just like, no, she's choking all the time. I don't like doing this. And then she just decided that it's just like, well, if she's going to die, she's going to die happy and she's going to be off leash. And from then on, it was just like off leash. And honestly, I was so afraid because I knew that I was like, she's going to die. Like she is going to die. So the first times that my mom did that, it was on her own. I was just like, I don't want to be part of this situation. But at the end of the day, my dog, I feel like now that I see those dogs, that was the relationship we had with our dog, because my dog would be like that. And one time she got lost because, like my mom was walking, my mom turned around in one corner and my dog didn't notice that. So the dog decided to just run back into my home. And then my mom just found out that she wasn't following her. So my mom was trying to find her. So she kind of like retraced her steps as well. And when she saw her in like a very long street, my dog was coming out from our street. So she went to our home and then she kind of like came back and was kind of like retracing the steps. And my mom was just like, Wamba! And she just ran to her. Well, from that time, the time that she lost my mom, she would never walk too far without like looking around all the time. All the time, she was always looking. And like this time that we went, we stayed with my mom a few days. And it was nice to kind of like relieve that. And that's where like all these memories came back to me, that I wasn't as bad of an owner as I thought, because we kept thinking back of like, oh, remember when we would come in here and what Wamba would do, and that you would like, I would hide on trees. She never found out that I could hide on trees. She was always like just panicking. And sometimes my mom and I would just play and she would be in the middle, just like, where do I go? And she would always choose my mom, because I always told her like, I'm like her best friend, but my mom is her leader. So like, whatever happens, she will always follow my mom because she's kind of like her authority figure. And I feel like that is sometimes also something that from my own experience, I pull out, saying that I think like dogs do really look for that, for like that source of knowledge, or that source of, like, you got me and I'm going to take, like I know things that you don't know. And I feel like dogs sense that, and sense that, like the boundaries, the routine, the having to kind of like give that to someone else to think about. So I feel like that is an element in that, where they do thrive in that, because I could see like she loved me, but she would always choose my mom at the end of the day, because my mom provided her with that structure, and that, my mom is the one who taught her to be off leash. And like for crossing the street, my mom would be like, wait. And then my mom look around and she was like, okay, cross, but just to like the middle thing. I don't know what's the name of that. And then she was like, but just there. And sometimes we're like, all the way. And my dog would just run to the other way. So it's just like, funny enough, we did train my dog. Weirdly enough, we never tried, but like just in life. So I feel like that's another thing that I take out from this, that like don't, like, life trains your dog at the end of the day, so like I feel like if you are mindful on the things that you're doing, and of course some people are way more risk averse than others. My mom was just a crazy lady, and she was just like, well, if she's gonna die, she's gonna die. Thankfully my dog lived till 13 years old, so like she was fine. She did not die in the streets. But yeah, I think like it just yeah, there's so many ways, but one thing that I am pulling from that, at least right now, where I have, for example, Bolt, which is one of my clients who is a Mexican rescue, actually. When I came back and I got to see, number one, how these dogs live in the streets, how they
Mhm.
move, like their agency, because I feel like that is one thing that, when you have this mentality of, we are going to save all the dogs and, like taking them out of the streets and sending them to Canada, in theory, that sounds like an amazing plan. And, like you may feel like an awesome person for doing that. And kudos to you, because there's a lot of dogs who do thrive in that type of situation. But you also cannot negate the fact that sometimes we become a little bit blurry in our view, because we try to feel like the heroes so much, and we get so much like reward from being the savior of something or someone else, that we don't get to see, okay, this dog was actually thriving in the streets. Like this dog, they
Mhm.
had a strategy, they knew this place, maybe they were born in here, this is all they knew, and now you take them to a place that they don't know, they doesn't smell right, nothing's familiar, and then no one even speaks the same language that they've been hearing, and then they live in a tiny apartment and they don't have freedom because they have leashes. So it's like there's a whole thing where you also have to consider, okay, what did this dog lost in this whole transaction? So I think like it has given me a lot, like a newfound appreciation for their agency and like their being, like they, yeah, like they have all these experiences and choices, things that they want to get or whatever. And I feel like with my dogs, at least my rescue dogs, and with Bolt, I've been trying to relying less, for example, on the leash, and try to kind of like embody that part of like, okay, because I see that he looks at me for guidance often. So like if I hesitate, he hesitates. So it's just like I feel like sometimes I do have to get better at being this figure that provides him safety, and that following me just makes sense, because I feel like that's where you really start getting it, that you really have to earn their respect, so to speak, of them,
Mhm.
like me not putting him in situations where he is gonna fail or he's gonna get into perceived danger, and I put him in situations when he grows, when he gets, like access to new things and discovers new capabilities. So I feel like that is something that I've been trying to at least just try to embody, simply how I move, how I guide him, and make it more about my movement and kind of like my being, rather than just leashing and like moving this and doing these things and just making him think. Because that's another thing that I realized. Like he loves like kind of like a mental challenge, and he's so analytic that, like when I did that video where I hit something and he was kind of like looking around,
Mhm.
and seeing things, and then you can see the moment where they find the solution, they're like, oh, I can try that. So it's just like giving him more of that, because at least in my head is like, maybe you had a lot of this before, and that's something that you're missing. So again, we're just guessing when it comes to what's going on in our dogs' lives, but it inspired me to bring more of that energy into my training.
Mhm. I think it gives people some things to think about when they're considering maybe even like rescuing a dog from another country. I don't know if I like necessarily agree with like bringing dogs in from other countries into like Canada per se, just because one, there's still a big population of dogs here that need homes that don't have homes and are strays or, have been in horrible situations and they get abandoned or, they get left behind. But I think it's about that assessing quality of life and whether the dog in its origin home is actually having that quality of life, or is it like a story that we're telling ourselves, or maybe it's a little mix of everything and is as like rescues too, or also could be big gray area. Like, I know from just like our experiences with rescues and noticing like which rescue pairs up which dog with which owner. It's not always the greatest, and not all rescues are that reputable. And it's unfortunate, but that's just the reality of kind of, developing these organizations. And some rescues even are kind of fronts for puppy mills. So I think there's just like so many things to consider when we're thinking about like quality of life of these animals. But from your observations, it seems like from what you saw where you were, those dogs had pretty good quality of life. Like, I'm sure if you plucked out one of those dogs from that situation and decided to ship it over here to Vancouver and give it a home in an apartment, they'd be like, what the fuck? Where am I? Like an alien abduction or something, you know?
Yeah, there's so much complexity when it comes to these things. And I think like that is also why I'm so excited to have these conversations that we're planning, because I've been hoping to get Toby from Craze Dog Training here, because he also specializes in working with rescue dogs, these dogs that they bring from overseas. So I would love to hear that. And I know that he also has experience like working with like this, I think like it was kind of like a volunteer program in Thailand. And I love their concept of they come and they take the dog because it's sick, like maybe the dog that I saw that it was limping. So you take that dog, you do whatever medical assistance they need, and then once they're healed, they put them back where they took them. So it's just kind of like you go back into your environment. And I love that they were saying, like there's no heroes here, like we really just want to help the dog, but at the end
Mhm.
of the day, like they are from the streets, they grew up there, that's what they know. And they find that the most respectful thing is to cure them, and I'm sure that they neuter when they do that, and then they just put them back in this in the street where they found them. So I feel like that is such a nice and alternative of like helping dogs, but not
Mhm.
overstepping our boundaries. Because again, like it's such a human thing that we just want to like take a sad cause and like make it better. But then even if you open that, like even with things that are happening now, that you see that all these like associations for like orphans, and then it's like a whole thing about yeah, like horrible things that happen. So it's just like, oh my god, like all these things that before it was just like, oh, he's a hero, so he's doing this association, and turns out that he was just kind of like moving people from one place to another. And it's just like, yeah, you really have to think a lot in like all
Mhm.
the repercussions. And I think one thing that I think like they mentioned that, how do they say, like natives, is it natives, I'm not sure exactly which like from which culture this was, but that they, like indigenous people, always thought about like 7 generations down the road of like how this decision is going to impact 7 generations
Uh-huh.
out. So it's just like really when you start to think about, like, it's like it pains me that we don't think about that anymore, because it's like you really make so much nuance information, like decisions, when you really see, okay, what is the impact, what happens after this awesome
Uh-huh.
action that I want to do, like what happens to this dog. And stepping away from, like, again, that fairy tale idea of like, oh, life is perfect and better. It's like, no, everything comes with its baggage. So like you
Uh-huh.
give and you lose, and then you have to just analyze those things and try to make as informed decisions as we can. But everything, it's like it's so complex. And again, like it's important to mention that there's so many dogs who are rescued from overseas and they just thrive. They're made for this life and they're just living their best life, could be the best thing that happened to them. But again, like there's also these other dogs who is not the same story. So it's just kind of like always keeping that open mind, I guess.
Mhm. It always comes back to nuance. Nuance, nuance,
Mhm.
nuance. And I think also just like I've been seeing a lot of like people using their own anecdotal experience to justify whatever it is they're trying to justify. And like I understand how deeply you can feel about something, especially when you're so close to it, about your own experience with whatever your rescue dog or a dog you had saved. But like, I would really love to know, like, statistically, what does that look like from the outside? And, like, how many rescue dogs do actually thrive when they are brought into an environment where they are being saved versus dogs who are not? And, like, I don't even think there's even research on that. And, like, I mean, it's sad, but like the dog industry is lacking so much in research and just, understanding it from a broader perspective. So we have to do a lot of speculation, or we have to do a lot of hearing from people who are actually in their specific fields. But I think it's important. I feel like, I don't know, people will just be like ready to jump on us maybe in the comment sections and be like, well, my dog's doing really great as a rescue, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, yes, I agree. Your dog probably is doing really great. But like, let's think about this more broadly. Like, what are the statistics of it? And like, maybe we don't know. Maybe we can look this up later. But it would be interesting to actually know the facts of, which dogs are actually thriving, or how many dogs are actually thriving versus not. Because I
And
think
I
that would
wish we
be.
had those
I
facts.
know,
Like it's
right?
just like like I really don't understand. I remember when I came into the industry and I could see all this fighting and like that side and this is like, why are we not doing research on this? Like why are we
Mhm.
not putting this into the test? And I know that people say like, oh, it's like it's so complicated and like it requires so many resources, but it's just like, guys, come on, like the industry has a lot of resources. So it's clearly someone wants us to be like someone benefits from people not being able to agree on something and be fighting all of the time. Because if we just left those petty things on the side and we actually kind of like roll up our sleeves and say like, okay, who here is a scientist? Like, what is the experience you have? Okay, so let's put together and like, there are so many brands and there's so much money in the dog world that to me just seems so illogic that no one is putting the money to actually test out things. And yeah, there's ethical concerns and there's all of these things, but it's just like, like there's a lot of unethical things happening. Just with my mom's neighbor, they went on vacation and they went before the 24th that we arrived. So I think like my mom says that they probably left on the 20th and we were there on the 30th. So the dog had been alone for 10 days in the front yard. So it was just kind of like closed. And they just put like a big bucket of food and a big bucket of water. And that's it. 10 days, the dog is there, it's pooping, it's peeing, it's barking at people because he's fucking desperate. And it's just like that is the life of that dog, right? So like if we can just take like a few solid experiments and kind of like test out whatever, and we can start agreeing a lot more, I feel like there's a lot more benefit to that. But like the fact that like I always say like someone benefits from us being fighting all of the time, so that's why I was like, I am not doing it. And yeah, like I know people may come into this comment section wanting to fight. We're not fighting here. We're not falling for it.
We're just sharing our experience and what we've seen. We're not taking side.
But if a lot of people share their experience, we may come into a closer thing to the truth, which at the end of the day, as we said, like that is our goal to like get the glimpse of knowledge that everyone has. Because I would love, I just like you mentioned, like imagine if someone starts commenting and instead of like, you guys are stupid, you start commenting of like, I am based in this place. This has been my experience with street dogs, or like, this is my experience as a dog owner in Denmark, or like whatever, like, but like if we all start kind of like putting those things and that personal experience into a bucket of experience, then we start getting data and then we start getting, like these numbers that it would be so amazing to have. Because I would love to know like how many of all the rescue dogs that you brought in were a success. Because at least in my experience, I saw a ton in the shelter who didn't ended up in like 100% success. So it's like, I would love to know more. But again, this is coming from our experience, which we know is flawed. But yeah, hopefully one day we'll get those numbers.
I hope so, because I think it'd be super helpful just for everybody who wants a dog. Like, we are all led to believe certain things about, like, oh, if you rescue, you're saving a life, and this rescue is gonna fit into your life so wonderfully. And sometimes they just pair it with like a horrible pairing for like the human, and it just doesn't work out, and it's really tough, and it just ends up being way more trouble if the dog had just like stayed in its like origin home. So I don't know.
Hmm.
There's just yeah, there's a lot to dive into when it comes to rescues and street dogs and bringing them over and importing them and
Uh,
everything.
we're just moving things around. And then remember, people, there is somewhere that it's just meat. So if you
Yeah,
feel
yeah,
sad
yeah.
about all of these things, at least they're on like the side where we don't eat, hopefully, doggies. But yeah, like I think it's just like if I learn anything, if I can summarize, it's just that it made me more aware of this like need of constantly keep reassessing your assumptions and really kind of like step back and be more observant, because I feel like we just jump into judging and saying, like you shouldn't do this and you shouldn't do that and that's shameful and that's that. But it's just like if you really start understanding like why are you doing it. So for example, a weird and super random example is that in Victoria Hill there's a new dog park that they started. Like it was just an empty field that everyone was using as a dog park. So the city actually turned it, like half of it, into a dog park, which was like amazing. Like now people have a place to have their dogs off leash, and I can just go into the other side with my dog on a leash and work on some reactivity, and it's perfect. It's been amazing. And then all of a sudden, maybe like 2 months ago, I started noticing these people who would go into the area that is not the dog park and start like having their dogs off leash there and playing with their dogs. And I started like by being so mad because I was like, fuck you guys. Like you have a dog park and like you are now taking my side where I can be on my leash with my dog. And if you have it on a leash, that's fine, but they just have it off leash. And I was just like so pissed off. And then one day I was just like, okay, what do I earn by being pissed off about this? It's just like I am just making more assumptions about what I think is
Mhm.
correct and what this person, but it's just like going back. I know that humans I always do something because just like dogs, because it works. So it's just like, okay, maybe I should approach instead of like yelling to this lady and say like, fuck you. I'm gonna like I genuinely would love, I haven't had an opportunity to ask. But I was like, next time I am try to like bring my nicest tone of voice and then just genuinely ask them like, why are you making this decision? There's a dog park, you're next to the door literally, and then you're choosing to be outside. And then I haven't had a chance to ask that, but the other day I went into the dog park and I realized that it's a mud pit. Like it's just like muddy, and it's just full of like there's puddles of water. So I was like, maybe people come on this side because there's grass on this side and the dog doesn't get as dirty, maybe. And then
Mm.
they don't get all soggy. So I was like, okay, I haven't asked the human, but at least I can make an assumption that actually makes sense of why someone would do this decision. So I feel like it really takes a while, like really to like control your emotions and really try to think that the other human is actually a thinking human and they have reasons to do it. And I feel like really switching from judgment into curiosity sounds amazing. Like it's something I use curious in like my branding. Like that's part of Curious Nudes. But like actually bringing it into life and stepping away from judgment and trying to come to true understanding, I think it's so hard. And people who make it sound like it's easy, maybe they're not doing. They're full of shit. So it's like, yeah, that's the thing that I said. Like, it takes time. It took me a few walks of being angry for me to understand that maybe this person has a reason and maybe I can approach it with curiosity and maybe I can think of other ideas. And finally, after 2 months, I came into my piece of like, okay, maybe this is a reason. And if so, fair. You're still a little bit entitled by not putting your dog on a leash, but at least you are not just a stupid human, because I feel it's so easy to dismiss stupid humans, but there's not that many stupid humans out there.
Girl, I'm like I feel you, man. Like it's so easy to just be like, okay, I'm gonna be like it's easy to think that you're gonna be like empathetic and understand where people are coming from. But in the moment when people do things like that, you're just like, what the actual fuck? Like, I was on a walk with Darwin the other day, and we had gone at like a different time than we normally go because I was taking my cousin out for a walk too because she wanted to come with us. So we went out at like 2:30 p.m., which is not the time we ever go out because we always go out early in the morning to avoid all the hustle and bustle. But I was like, okay, 2:30, we'll go into the forest. Like maybe it'll be not be busy. And it wasn't as busy as it normally is. But for some reason, at that time of day, every single dog we saw was off leash in a not off leash zone. And I was just like, what is going on? My dog got rushed like 3 times, and I had to yell at 3 people to recall their dog. And they saw us from far away. So it's not like we just came out of nowhere because I give people a lot of space. And I was fuming that day. I was so livid. But it takes a moment to be like, okay, let me just, like, I always have to talk to Ricky about it because he's like my voice of reason. And he's just like, well, Amor, think about where they're coming from. There's a reason they're going at that time because they're probably busy during the weekday and they don't have time to take their dog out. So they think it's probably just easier to let them off leash. And I'm like, okay, I understand. But it just took me like a good 48 hours to come off that like fuming zone to be able to like empathize with people and be like, okay, it's not their fault. They didn't know. They don't know my dog's reactive. They don't know my dog might like be lungy and jumpy and stuff. So I get it, girl.
But
I
it
get
takes a while.
Yeah, it's hard.
That's
Oh
what I
my
say. Like
gosh.
everyone who's just out there saying like, oh yeah, I did so amazing. It's like, no, don't believe that, people. Like you have to like really account for the fact that all of this is hard work. And like even just identifying, like really putting the break of like, okay, these humans might also have the reasons. It took me like, I feel like a full month until I saw like the third person doing it, that I was like, okay, there must be a reason why people are making this choice. But yeah, I think like it's so hard. So I feel like that too, I can get of like how some people may be a lot triggered maybe by our conversation today, because like it's not easy. And it's like I feel like our brain doesn't want us to understand a spectrum, because it's easier to say like this is good, this is bad,
Totally.
and it's easy, you know, like the brain always wants you to make the easy choice and like not think about all these weird possibilities and all these complexities, because the brain cannot spend that much energy. So it makes sense, but at the same time it's like, yeah, we have to like be able to breathe in, breathe out. If you're triggered, like think about it, and maybe in like 2 weeks come back. It takes a
If you
while.
listen to this episode and you're immediately triggered, first of all, we apologize. We don't mean anything by it. But also maybe take a day or two before you respond back to us to have a think about everything we said. And I don't know, maybe just ponder it a little bit before you respond so we don't get scared by your scary comments.
And maybe just finish the whole episode, because maybe if you just get like a tiny bit and then you go away, you don't get the part where we understand that it's complex. So yeah, like that's
Yeah.
a disclaimer we should put into like every episode. It's like, guys, take some time. It's a good practice for everyone to be triggered, and then don't attack. Just reflect on that. Why are you
Yeah.
triggered?
I think that's what makes our conversations so interesting sometimes. It's because I feel like we really like to live in this gray area where we're not really just black and white and we just don't full or wholeheartedly agree with one side or the other. And we kind of take a little bit from each side. And I know it is easier to just pick a side and have your beliefs all like neat and all tidy, like in a bow and everything. But man, life is so complex, and like everything in this is so complex and nuanced, and there's so many different layers to it, and you can't just say yes or no to one thing and it's not black and white. So yeah, don't get mad at us, please. Don't yell at us. I don't like being yelled at.
Don't do that. We're just trying to have conversations here.
Not because I don't like confrontation. I'm okay with confrontation.
She's well.
I'm well versed in confrontation. I just don't like being yelled at because I have a hard time holding back, guys.
Again, we're going back to stopping ourselves is not easy. So
Yeah.
that's a lot better. And I feel like at the end of the day, it goes back to what we were saying of like really this belief that, you know, like the people who get it and the people who are here for the nuance and the complexities and challenging their brains, stepping away from what they believe and what they don't believe. like I feel like that people are gonna just be attracted to it, and if someone gets triggered, well, they're not gonna listen to the episodes, and then they'll just be triggered by one thing, and that's okay. But I always like I try to think of like that fact of like the more we are true to ourselves, we're gonna attract other people who resonate with that, and that's the kind of people we want. So like if you live in the gray just like us,
Come join us.
this is the place.
I feel like there's so many sound bites from this episode that we can use that would be so clickbaity. We talk about e-collars, we talk about dog meat trade, importing dogs from Mexico.
Yeah, like maybe we go viral. We don't know. In the bad way.
That's not our goal, but if it happens, I mean, it happens.
But no one likes to go viral in the bad thing where they just out a tune or something.
Yeah, please don't clip this out of context, because watch the whole episode, guys. Listen to the whole episode. Anyways, oh my goodness. I feel like we've gone all around this topic and back around, and God knows where we are right now.
But this is the chaos that we were here for in this first solo episode.
Was there anything else you wanted to talk about in terms of the street dogs or dog life in Mexico, or your final takeaways now that you've come back into Canadian life and have settled back into it and now walking your dogs again?
I mean, number one, it's just crazy how normal everything feels. Like when I went there, like I haven't been in Mexico since like 8 years ago. So it was crazy to me that even though I haven't been there in 8 years, like the next day I woke up there, like I knew everything. Like I knew where to go to point A to point B. I kind of like you just bring that into the normal life of Mexico. And it was just like, wow, it's so crazy because I haven't been living this in 8 years. And all of a sudden, it just feels so normal to go to this place where I used to go all the time. And it's just like, oh, yeah, I'll get there. So I feel like it just like it immediately kind of like your brain switches back and it's just like, wow, yeah, this is normal. And seeing all the dogs in the streets and seeing all these things. And it's just like, oh, yeah, this is part of life. And then I came back and it's the same. Like, it's just like now all the things are like I'm in the routine and I'm just like seeing things as they are. And it's just like, oh, everything it's back to normal. So it's just funny how you like how quickly your brain kind of like deletes that information and it's just kind of like, okay, this is it. This is what we're working with. Because like I didn't feel anything weird either going there or coming back. It's just like that's just life. That's it. And I think like just in general, I think like as I always say, and I think like that's really what I want. And we talked about so many things, but like the biggest thing I wanted to say is the fact that dogs are sentient beings and they have like a whole world happening inside of them and they're making decisions, they're gathering information, their senses just like ours are gathering things, they're feeling things, their brain is making decisions to make them survive. So I feel like at the end of the day, like it just taught me to respect that even more in my dogs, even though that's something that I've always believed and I like a lot of what I work is because of that. But it just kind of like made it seem like, especially seeing them, these dogs who are just living in the streets and living their life and they see humans as just like one strategy, you know, like I can get food from them, like maybe if I follow this human, but most of them, like they were just kind of like, oh, hoping for the garbage, hoping for this thing. But yeah, they're so smart and they have their ways of just surviving. So I feel like we're all in this game of survival and we have to respect that these dogs have their own cognition, like very unique. They have information about the world that maybe we don't have, and the same the other way around. So I think like at the end of the day, it's just confirming that belief and making that even more part of how I work with both humans and dogs because of kind of like that respect and helping people really see that and don't feel like don't take it personal if their dog is not all over them and don't care about anything else because that's just a dog being a dog. And it's just like they are there because we give them food. Other than that would be like kidnap and it's just like that's horrible. So we did kidnap these beings into coming and living with us and we took them in. They didn't have any choice on that. So I feel like that's something we have to like keep in mind. And I feel like it's our duty as the species with like the bigger brain or like more sophisticated brain, although I feel like they're sophisticated, so I don't think that even applies. But like just the humans who can like reason and are so proud of our powers of reasoning, I feel like it's up to us to really use that brain and try to figure this out in a way that we continue to be beneficial for both sides.
Totally. Anytime I work with like puppy parents, I'm always like, okay, think about this. You just kidnapped an animal from its mother and you have brought it into your home. Think about how traumatic that is. I know it's really cute and I know it's like giving you a lot of love, but just put yourself in their shoes and trying to adjust to this crazy like human world. Like you don't speak the same language, you're doing weird things, like you smell weird, you're not what they're used to. So just think about that as we
Oh my
go
God,
into things.
people on your puppy class are there for a blast. First
They're gonna be
lesson,
in for a ride.
think about how you kidnap your dog. I
Well, I
love
think
it.
it's important that people think about it that way because they just think like, I don't know, that a dog will adapt so easily to their life and understand them right away and know how to communicate with them. But like different species, baby, you just took out of its home and you brought into your home. Like, just think about how jarring that experience is and how much patience you have to give them. Because everybody's always like, I always see it in like Facebook groups and stuff. They're like, my puppy is 14 weeks old and they're still not crate trained, it's still not potty trained. I'm like, it's a literal baby that you kidnapped.
And you
Like,
brought
think.
home.
Like, oh my God, have some patience and like be easy on the puppy. Like, they don't know. They're just babies.
You guys, it's gonna be a fun class. I love it.
So, if you guys have a puppy, join me in Port Moody.
January 19 is the first
Yeah.
class.
This will air long after that, but
Well, actually, it's the next one
actually
I'm posting.
no, that's true.
Mhm.
Oh
So
my
we
gosh.
can sell you an ad to Olive Park.
All right, guys, come join me. But anyways, Laura, this has been so fascinating and interesting, and I'm sure I'm gonna have lots more questions for you as you send me those videos and as you show them on our social media page. But I think it was a lot of food for thought for people to think about. Just like kind of stepping outside your bubble if you haven't really had a lot of experience with like the rescue world or street dogs or, you know, dogs coming from other countries, but also just a different perspective on what life with dogs looks like outside of our little bubbles here. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. And yeah, I think like at the end of the day, that's why this podcast exists because we feel like we do need to have these conversations where, because I feel like it's so hard when, like just like Justine was mentioning in her episode, like people jump on your throat so easily out there that it's so scary to simply put a thought out there or like have a conversation that you
Mm.
are not quite sure about what it's totally right. But when are you? When are we 100% sure about life? Like never. So like if I am waiting for the moment where I know everything to start talking about things and having conversations with other people, it's like we are never gonna have them. So I think like at the end of the day, we have to, I think, be brave enough to just have our conversations and be able to like create. I feel like that is my biggest hope for this podcast, to really create a community where we can all have these rough conversations about whatever your experience is and whatever this person is living and what is that, because we cannot, like, no one can fight your reality. You are living it, you are in it, and that's what you're seeing, and that's what your whole experience is leading you to see. So I feel like my biggest hope is to get this podcast in a way that we build a community of people who want that, who want freedom to speak, who want freedom to just share what seems real to them, what seems, like that makes sense. And I feel like
Mm-hmm.
the more we have those conversations, we're going to see kind of like a thread forming of like, oh, like these people who are like so disconnected in these things, connected in one thing. So I feel like if we have more of these courageous, like maybe ignorant, but at the same time wise conversations, at some point we're gonna get to that bigger truth. So yeah, thank you for being here if you enjoyed this conversation.
I love that. What a great way to end this episode. And if you loved it, share with a friend.
Who won't get triggered.
I mean, it's okay if they do, but just remember, take some time to think about it and then come back to us.
I love it. But yes, thank you to you who are listening. And thank you, Olivia, for having a rough conversation with me. Speaking roughly with me, although
Anytime.
that sounds dirty.
I like the rough conversation. Let's stick
sounds
with
less
that.
dirty.
Yeah. Speaking roughly. I'm dying. Anyways, guys, thanks for listening, and we will catch you on our next episode.
Bye.
Bye.